Good morning, everybody. My name is Brad Katz. I'm a client experience manager here at Blackboard, and it's my pleasure to introduce Julia Tungli from George Mason University, and I'm going to pass it over to her to introduce herself and to present her session on making asynchronous content interactive.
Thank you, Brad. Hi, everybody. So I'm Julia Tungli. As Brad said, I am an instructional technologist at George Mason University. Excuse me. So my experience is throughout education, K-12 experience mostly, teaching math, teaching ESL, also working at the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. So I've had a good amount of experience across the education platforms. And today we're going to be talking just about asynchronous courses and interactivity specifically. So you may have seen this description of our session. We're going to be focusing on collaboration, multimedia, different kinds of interactive elements that you can bring into your courses. A lot of people think that asynchronous and interactive is some sort of contradiction, because if something is asynchronous, how can it be interactive? And that's what we're going to talk about today. Just because you're not meeting face-to-face, just because your students are not meeting at the same time, that does not mean they cannot interact with different elements of your course. Oftentimes, asynchronous courses can feel isolating. It can feel like you're just doing something in a bubble all by yourself. While there's certainly a place for that, self-paced courses are like that. If you don't want that, if you want students to interact and work together on things, those are the things we're going to be talking about. Social learning is really, really great for really building deeper connections. So if you read an article and then you move on with your life versus you read an article and then you discuss that article with other people, anytime you bring in social learning, people are going to have better, deeper connections. They're going to remember things better. They're going to learn things better. So that's really the power that we want to bring in today. And this will still allow students to have flexible schedules. I forgot to mention it earlier, but I myself am a mother. I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. Before the pandemic started, I was also a student for a while. The pandemic made me realize I could not balance full-time work and having children and being a student, so I put that on pause. But people have different lives, they have different schedules, and they need flexibility. That's why they choose to go for an asynchronous format, but that doesn't mean they need to give up the social interaction. That doesn't mean that they need to give up all those things that they can get from social learning. So we're going to talk basically about 3 major topics today. So if you're talking about interaction, you could be talking about student content interactions. How do the students interact with the content? We're going to be talking today about Blackboard, because this is a Blackboard conference. I'm going to be focusing just on the basic tools built into Blackboard. I'm not going to be talking about any third-party tools. I'll be talking, in case you have original versus ultra, we'll be focusing on like the original course options for the most part. As we're talking through our content today. But yeah, so one of those big content topics is student and content. How do they interact with the content itself? Also, student-student interaction. So how do students interact with one another asynchronously? Just because they are not in the platform at the same time does not mean that they cannot interact. We'll talk about that. And then the last piece we'll talk about is student-instructor interaction. So how do students interact with instructors? Because the instructors are also people. It also creates that social interaction, and you want to be more than just the invisible person grading on the other side of the computer. You want to interact with those students and help them build those connections again in a different way. So that's going to be the structure of our talk today. I will pause a little bit after student content and a little bit after student to see if we have any questions, but we should have time for questions at the end as well. So let's get right into student content interactions. The first part, and it's not the most exciting thing in the world, but it really is very important, is how do you organize your course? Because how you organize your course is really going to help determine how students interact with your content. So if you want students working where they are doing things interactively, they are bouncing things back and forth, they're reading articles at roughly the same time, you really want them working roughly on the same content in the same time period. So if you have a course that is entirely self-paced, again, there's a time and a place for that. When I started my current position as an instructional technologist, I did self-paced Blackboard course. And that helped me really learn some of the basics of Blackboard and how it worked. And that definitely, was effective, but it didn't have any interaction. If you want interaction, you want people working on the same material roughly at the same time. So whether it's by week or by unit or however you choose to do it, you want them working in the same place so that you can have the different interactive elements in place and having people go back and forth. If it's just a student interacting with the content and then leaving that content there and no student picks that up, then you're not going to get the dialogue that you want for interaction. Make sure your course is really, really well organized so everything is easy to find. If students don't know what they're supposed to be working on, then they might miss a piece, and that will inhibit their ability to interact with the content and with each other. So if you have, a requirement of reading, these 5 articles in your course, and a student doesn't know that they're supposed to read all 5 articles, and they go to a discussion board, everybody seems to be discussing 5 articles, and they were like, oh, wait, I didn't know that I was supposed to be reading these 5 articles. It's going to make it very hard for them to engage with the other students. So make everything really easy to find. I personally like task checklists a lot, and I know a lot of other students do as well. So if you have everything grouped by week, so you have in your course menu, you have here's week 1, here's week 2, or unit 1 or unit 2, however you choose to organize that. For each week or each unit, give students a checklist of here are the things that you're supposed to be accomplishing in this week. It can be in an order, it can be an open-ended thing where they can do it in any order they want. But the checklist is going to make sure that they know what they are supposed to be accomplishing. So when they get to the interactive pieces, they have accomplished what they need to interact with others. Also, try to set intermediate deadlines. And again, this can be smaller deadlines or bigger deadlines. But if you have, for example, a project that the students work on for the first half of the semester, don't just have a deadline when that project is due. Have intermediate deadlines where maybe they share out what they're working on. So, week 1, everybody is supposed to get the framework done for their project. They share that framework and they have other students comment on it. That both gets them the feedback to help make their project stronger, but it also creates that interaction that we're going for. So intermediate deadlines really help with building interactive elements into your course. And lastly, if you have things that need to be completed in a certain order, use the learning modules built into Blackboard. So Blackboard, you can create folders and you can just have your content items stacked so that students can complete them however you want. But if you know things need to be completed first, second, third, then create a learning module so that they're completing it in the correct order. Again, the easier it is for students to know what they're supposed to be doing and when they're supposed to be doing it, the easier it will be when you get to the student-student interactions or student-instructor interactions for them to be in the right place so that they can get the most out of those interactions. So if we think about content, there are so many different types of content. And again, I'm just focusing on Blackboard specific content because there is a lot of third-party stuff out there. But when you're talking about content, be thoughtful in including content. Do not just include something because you're like, well, this seems like something new and something different. I'm going to try it out. Think about how it helps your students reach their goals. Whatever your goals are for your course, you always want any content helping them reach that goal. Do not include interaction just for the sake of interaction. So for example, if you have students, a popular thing that I keep coming back to is, they read an article, they post about that article in a discussion board. That's very, very popular and very common. If you have them do that every single week for 15 weeks and you have them do it in the same way, then you're going to kind of lose that interactive piece because people are going to get habituated to it and they are not going to engage with it as well as they did earlier in the semester. So don't just do the interaction for the sake of the interaction because students will burn out from being required to do too many interactions as well. Think about the goals in your course and try to include those interactions thoughtfully. Also, when you're thinking about the content that you're including, think about it not just within your week or your unit, but also think about it across the course. So within a certain week, if you just include one content type, then students are going to get overloaded. But also if you have everything done across the semester, where it's done the same exact way every week. Every single week you read an article, every single week you post a discussion board, every single week you watch a video, every single week you do this, and it's the same format. Again, it's going to create a sort of burnout where they're not going to be engaged with it because everything is the same. Try to mix things up, but again, being thoughtful of your goals for the course. So some different examples of media types. Again, I'm not really getting into how we do these things in Blackboard because it's a very short session today. But some examples that you can do in Blackboard are badges. There are students that really love badges. You don't even need to incentivize them because some students will just automatically gravitate towards them. Badges can be for completing a week's assignment. Badges can be for bigger things like getting a certain number of people to respond to your discussion board posts. Different sorts of badges. Not everybody will enjoy them, but that's why you want to get different media types in them. But the badges will, definitely incentivize doing certain activities for your students, even without grades. Games are always wonderful, and this can also include gamified elements, not necessarily games. But if you think about anything that motivates students to complete a task, can be thought of as a gamified element. So if you are talking about, working through an activity, and the activity is broken up into several parts, and each time the students complete a certain part, they get a piece of a puzzle, and then they have to put the puzzle together at the end. Those sorts of gamified elements that take the task that students would be doing anyway, and then creates a gamey element where they are working towards a goal and they get some sort of prize, whether it's a prize like a badge or something else. Those will help motivate students just in interacting with the content. So again, we're just talking right now about interacting with the content. Another thing is journals and reflections. I used to be a math teacher, but I used to be a math teacher that gave journals. I know that that's not all math teachers, but I really liked having my students reflect on things. So things like, I gave them a really tough math problem and they had to work through it. It took some time to work through it. And then in the reflection, I would have them say, well, where was one problem where you stumbled? One part of this problem where you were really frustrated and you didn't know what to do next, and how did you overcome that problem? I would have them reflect on these things. And that not only had them going through the problem itself, which of course has its own purpose and goal in my class, but it had them thinking back to it. It had them going through it again, and it helps again deepen the connection when you go back and you think about those things again. So you can have journals at the end of your each week if you want, or you can just have journals at the end of a project. But taking the time to reflect on the content, even though they're working on their own, it helps them interact with the content again and in a different and unique way. Likewise, knowledge check quizzes are always wonderful, whether you want to have them for credit or for no credit. If you have a piece of content that students work through to learn some information for your course, give them just, like a couple of questions to give them that reassurance that they've gotten out of that content what you wanted them to get out of that content. There are a lot of ways to do that. And again, I'm not going to touch on those so much right now, but knowledge check quizzes are a really easy way. If you build them in, you can just use the test and features of Blackboard if you want and have it not worth any credit. But it helps them interact and reflect on that content. Text and articles, I've given that example a bunch today just because they're very common. Videos are also wonderful. You can make your own videos. You can share YouTube videos. You can do a series of videos where between the videos you have to do knowledge check quizzes. But try to mix things up and not always do things just in one way, because if you keep doing things in the same way, they get habituated to it and they don't engage with it as well when they've done it 15 times before, as an example. So that was just talking about student and content. Brad, I think you've been watching the chat, and I have seen a couple of questions come in. Brad, what questions have people had?
So it looks like most of them have been, some of them have been dealt with in chat already. There was a question about a way to get the task list in Blackboard to be filtered so it's not quite overwhelming. And I think there was a recommendation about, building a week-by-week task list into your course content, not relying exclusively on the platform. but supporting it with some content that you're talking about. And then there are a couple of other questions that, again, that I think were addressed in the chat, just about where to find certain things. And I think people provided guidance. One was around tasks. One was around sort of badging and achievements. It's hard to do in this context, but I think in terms of directing people where, folks in chat have talked about it. One thing that I'll recommend, I'll jump in. You don't have to field this. I'll do the Blackboard side of it. Is if you go to help.blackboard.com and search any of those features that you're looking for, that'll be a really good place to get you in there. Gladys Bennett just posted a question about providing an example of using a puzzle. She liked that idea, and then would give a prize to the first student to finish it. But could you give an example of what you're talking about?
So I'm just going to go back to my math teaching days because it's the easiest example for me to give. But what I would do is if I had an activity or a project that was broken up into pieces, completing each part, let's just say it was 9 pieces. It was a 9-piece activity or a 9-piece puzzle. I'm sorry, a 9-question activity. Then each time students finished one, they would get a puzzle piece or a clue. So puzzle piece, I would think more for the younger crowd, clue more for the older crowd. But the thought is by the time you finish all 9 pieces, you put together all of those clues or you put together all of those puzzle pieces to try to figure out the big question, to put them all together into one solution. One thing that's really nice if you do something like that, if you use the discussion forums, is you can have a discussion forum just for achievements. So these are achievements that either the instructor can share out with the class, and I'm getting ahead of myself because I was going to mention this later, but you can have also places for students to share their own achievements. So if you do some sort of puzzle or clue-based activity where students are trying to finish the puzzle or put together the clues to figure out the big answer, then they can share it out on your achievements discussion forum and say, hey, you guys, I did all 9 tasks. And here was my solution. I'm so proud of myself. And then other students, you'll be surprised, will just jump in and be like, wow, that's awesome. I was working on that, but I couldn't get number 7. And that creates those interactions. So that's a really great place. I love that you guys are helping each other out. As I said in the beginning, this is a very short session, so I don't really have time to tell you how to do all these things. I'm mostly just here giving you ideas about different things that you can do. So I love that you're here helping each other out to get through those ideas as well. Thank you so much for everybody participating in the chat. I think we'll continue on now to our next section, which is student-student contact. So this is probably what you were thinking about when you first decided to join this session. How do students interact with each other? Excuse me. So once you have all of these pieces kind of in place for how you have it laid out in your course, how do you encourage students to interact with each other? The first way, and I think probably the most popular way on Blackboard, is through the discussion forums themselves. So I thought that this deserved its own slide. So if you're thinking about the discussion forums, a few things that you can do in the discussion forums, when you create a forum, there's a checkbox that lets you do something called a post first forum. So a concern that a lot of people have in the discussion boards is, there are students, let's say you have 50 students in your class and they have a week to post an answer to some question that you've posed. There are students that are going to wait until, several people have responded to the question, read through everybody else's questions, then form their opinion based on what everybody else has said, and then post their thought, which doesn't really tell you what they thought authentically on their own because it's flavored by what everybody else said. So the post first forum, I never thought of as a tongue twister before. The post first forum is really great because that type of forum requires students to post before they can see what other people have said. Once they post, then they can see what everybody else has said, that they can comment on other people's threads and they can contribute in that way. But that way you first get their own thoughts, at least as their first thread in that forum. So consider using those. Those are really great. Another idea is that, the discussion forums allow text, certainly, and that's what we use a lot of the time, but consider having students incorporate different types of media. Students can post videos in the discussion forums. You can have them do video introductions when you start your course. If the students don't see each other, then they're not going to connect with each other as well. So if you have students post pictures of themselves, if they post videos of themselves, that really lets them get to know each other from the beginning a lot better. And that's really going to strengthen their relationship and therefore their interactions throughout the course better. Have students post mind maps. I love mind maps. If you're thinking through a problem and you need to figure out how to do something, then have students try to draw a mind map of how they would work through that solution. Maybe you're working on creating a website and you're trying to think about what the structure of the website should look like. A mind map is a really great solution for that. And that mind map, once you draw it, it's just an image that you can post right there on the forum. You post your mind map, other people post their thoughts about it. So don't think of the discussion forums as just text, because you're not going to have, again, if everybody's just typing text all the time, they're not going to attend to it in the same way as if they have videos. Sometimes they have mind maps, they have different sorts of things. One big piece of advice, if you do something like this, if it's your first time, for example, requiring students to post videos, there are going to be students that find this a technologically challenging activity. So make sure for that you do either a low stakes or no stakes assignment first. So if you're requiring students to post videos for the first time, Icebreaker is a really great one. You don't have to give them any credit for it. So that way, if they have trouble with the videos, they're not stressing about losing credit because they had struggles. But that way, once they get through that activity, the next time you ask them to post videos, it's already something that they've done and they're more comfortable working through that. Things to consider for your discussion forums. Do you want them to be informal or formal? Do you want students to include citations in your discussion forums? Those are great, but also try to include, an informal space where students can just interact with each other. The example I gave earlier of just an achievements board. So share your achievements on this board, anything that you've done. It could even be something like, you watched a video that was posted to the class and it helped you make a connection that you didn't make before in the class, and you just want to share that with the class and say, hey, you guys, I watched this video and this is what I realized. That can be very informal, but really empowering for the students to be able to share it, and then for other students to be able to engage in that content with them and say, wow, I didn't realize that. That's actually really cool. Along with that, do you want your discussion forums to be graded or ungraded? Of course, when you make it graded, that's going to have students invested in it more because they care about their grades, but also consider having some ungraded. I would pair this with the informal piece. So that it creates more of that interaction without having the stress of the formal citations and the graded discussion and so forth. The placement very much matters for your discussion forum. So your discussion forums will be in your course menu, which is great, but if all of your discussion forums are just in your course menu, then it's going to be disjoint from the other content they're engaging in. So try to do something like, if they have to read an article and then respond in the discussion forum. I keep coming back to this. Have the article as a content item on your page, and then just below that, have the link to the discussion forum. So as soon as they're done reading the article, they can engage in the discussion forum. It's fresh in their mind, and it gives them a little bit more to work with. If they have to click around your course, so they have to, take in all of the content for the week or for the unit, and then they have to click over to the discussion forum and so forth, it's going to make things a little bit more disjoint and a little bit less natural. Think about this in terms of how you would do this synchronously in a classroom atmosphere. The students read an article, then they gather together and they discuss it. It's right there at the same point so that they can engage with it a little bit better. And lastly, when you think about the prompts that you have for your discussion forums, have prompts, first of all, because yes, it's possible to create a forum with no prompt and then students don't necessarily know what they're supposed to do with it, but use open-ended explicit prompts. So try not to ask yes or no questions, because the students are just going to give yes or no answers. And if a student says yes or no, then nobody else is going to engage with yes or no. They're just going to leave that and the conversation will be dead. Try to make things open-ended and make things very explicit. Do not just say, what were your thoughts on this week's assignment? Because that's too open-ended and the students don't know what to say. Say something like, the author made this argument. Do you agree or disagree? Why? And that way they're trying to think about, well, did I agree with that guy? I'm not sure. And this is why I'm not sure. And that's what they're going to post. And they're going to post something that will make it more engaging to respond to. I am totally running over. Students and interaction, the other big one is groups. Groups are built into Blackboard very, very well. There are so many different group tools that you can do. I'm going to try to run through this really quickly. Assignments, you can create group assignments. So once you create groups, again, not talking about the how here today, but once you do, consider using group assignments so that students are working on things together. This is really nice, especially for larger classes, because if the students are working on an assignment as a group, then you're not grading as much. But it also requires them to work together. I just wanted to give a quick nod to Collaborate, even though it's a synchronous tool, because when you create groups, you can also have group Collaborate rooms. And this is, while technically not asynchronous, students can work together to find a time that they can meet. And it can be, even in an asynchronous course, a place where they can, on their own, meet at the same time. So this is still an option. It's a little bit, blurry between the asynchronous, synchronous line. But in an asynchronous course, this is a really easy way to have even a tiny little bit of synchronous activity. The discussion boards, also really great. Wikis are really nice if you want students working on something together. So if you want students to synthesize some information and create a summary from some work that they've been doing, a wiki is really nice because everybody can edit the wiki, as opposed to a discussion board where one person writes something and then another person replies. In the wiki, one person can write something and then another person can go into what that person wrote and edit it to add their own pieces, and then they work together collaboratively until they get that summary. And then I'm just going to say, be thoughtful about how you use. You can, when you create the groups, you can have manual enrolled groups, random enroll, self-enroll. Think about how you want to do it. Do you want students in the same group for the entire course, or do you want to switch it up so they're in different groups for different assignments? If they're in the same group for the entire course, they're going to build relationships, which will be really great. But if you also put them in the same course, sometimes they won't be in the best working relationship. Maybe later on the semester, you can have a better sense of which students would work well together. So maybe you want to switch things up. Again, going over a little bit. So those are a couple of things about groups. And then my very last thing on students, and I'm just going to say very, very quickly, is there are other interactions. I'm just skimming the surface here. Blogs are really great. Blogs are different than discussion forums because blogs, you're really thinking about the student as the owner of some content. So a student creates a blog post, that is kind of their content, and then people are commenting on that, as opposed to a discussion forum where you're trying to create more conversations and everybody's kind of an equal footing. Peer assessment tool is a wonderful tool that lets students kind of grade each other, evaluate each other. You can even use rubrics in the peer assessments, but this is really great for having students put some content out there and then having other students evaluate that content. And lastly, like I said, there are a lot of third-party tools. There are so many third-party tools that helps you encourage interaction. Just be thoughtful. Always ask for whatever interaction you want to create in your course. How does the tool or the interaction help my students achieve the course goals? It's just like I said before. Don't just use peer assessment for the sake of being able to say, hey, I have peer assessment. Use peer assessment because having students assess each other is going to make this activity better, and it's going to help them achieve their goals better. So that was a whole lot of talking. Again, I'm going to pause for just a moment to see if we have any questions that we might be able to answer.
I think there were two open questions. Apologize. I'm going to try and get the pronunciation correct. Malibu Makone had a question about, said these are all great suggestions when you're in countries and institutions, at institutions where connectivity and data can be a challenge. How would you promote interaction in larger classes? How would you, as a lecturer, manage providing feedback to students outside of the happier student-faculty ratio, I guess I would say? So that's one question. And then the other, I'll just toss out there, and you can jump on these as you see fit. Emily Brock asked about ways of managing the discussion forum. Is there a way to shrink the discussion forum, keep old forums open, but not have to scroll through thread after thread after thread as they grow? And so I'll leave you with those two.
So for the first question, I would say that you would want to rely more heavily on groups. If you have a larger class, then break that class into smaller groups where the students can kind of work together a little bit more. It's also really great if you do have students in groups, have roles in that group. So if you have, 100 students, and you're like, well, I can't, monitor all the questions that 100 students have, then have a question representative. Break those groups, break those 100 students into 10 groups of 10. And then for each group of 10, have a question representative. And this can be, because again, I encourage you to have things by week and by unit, a rotating role. So it's not the same student every time. But in that group of 10, they discuss the question first. First, they asked it within the group. And if they don't reach an answer to that question within the group, then the question representative can bring that to you as the professor. And that way, you're only dealing with the question representative each week and not with all the students. But the students are still interacting. They're still getting an opportunity to ask their questions, and hopefully they're still getting their answers. So that would be for the larger groups. That would be just lean really heavily on the groups for that. And that doesn't necessarily require, larger bandwidth, because I'm just talking about text questions where you can just post back and forth in discussion forum. And I'm so sorry, Brad, completely forgot the second question. Can you please repeat that one?
So the two questions, one was about the large groups, which you just talked about. The other was managing discussion forums over the course of a term as they begin to grow.
Yeah, so for that, I would just say try to break things down. And again, have things posted in the place where students need to use them. So instead of having students going to the main discussion forum page, have students have links directly in a week going to the discussion forum for that week. And maybe it's a couple different discussion forums, but try to break them up into different forums so students aren't posting in the same place over and over again, because that's where it starts to get really long. Because if you're using the same forum week after week after week, it's going to get really long. But if you have each week you have a different discussion forum, then that forum is only going to get so long before you move into the next week. And students really don't go back to previous weeks very much, so you don't have to check on those so much. Of course, Blackboard does let you know where you have unread content, so you can just look for your notifications in there. But if you break things down into more discussion forums, and if you post those discussion forums at the place where students need to interact with the content, then that's going to make it a little bit easier to manage that, so the threads don't get so long. So thank you, Brad, for your help. We only have a few more minutes, so I'm going to fly through my last little piece, which is about student and instructors. And I thought I was going to run out of time a little bit here, so I decided to just focus on one thing when it comes with students and instructors: feedback. How do you give feedback to your students? The first thing I would always encourage people to do is have a discussion forum where the students can ask questions. And again, if you have that larger group, maybe they ask within their groups first, and then you just have a representative each week that posts to the Ask the Instructor if you don't want to be overwhelmed with how many people might be asking you questions. But it's always really nice to just have an open place where students can just ask you questions, and it can be as small as, you said to read, this chapter this week, but the thing that you posted was for a different chapter. Is that right? Just clarifying questions, or it could be deeper questions about, I noticed this theme coming up in what we were doing this week. How does that really affect what we're studying in this course? So any of those sorts of questions, really great, and ask the instructors. Make sure you contribute to student-student interaction. So that could be the discussion forums, that can be elsewhere. But do not just leave it to the students, because sometimes the students are just going to let that die out. So try to, again, thoughtfully, open-ended, explicit contributions to what the students are doing. So if the student posts a video and then another student, just says, hey, great video, that's not really going to promote discussion. So you go ahead, you watch that video, and you say, wow, I noticed this in your video. Why did you include it? And you just post it as, it's not that you're the instructor in that case. It's just something to get students thinking about that content in a different way, so that maybe somebody else will respond to it. So make sure you contribute to your student-to-student interactions. Always try to focus on positives and areas for improvement. So I put this in a little bit of a strange order, but I don't know if you guys use BB Annotate, but you can annotate the student work that students hand in. Oftentimes annotations end up being, crossing things out and circling places for change. And even though it's not explicitly a negative thing, it really just highlights everything that was wrong. So make sure that you give feedback along with those annotations to really also focus on the positives or areas for improvement. So not just you did this wrong, but how can we improve it for next time? Because really the reason these students are students isn't so they can find out what they did wrong, it's so that they can grow better. So really focus on positive and not negative, but how do you improve for next time? So those are the two focuses. Highlight exemplary work. So whether you have a place in your course where you post exemplary work, or a place where students can just share things where, like this student made a really great example for this assignment, and I just thought it was, something that everybody else should see. It makes the students feel good if their work is considered exemplary, and it helps other students see what is exemplary so that their future work can be exemplary. And last, I strongly encourage you, at least sometimes, this would be difficult to do every time, try to leave video feedback. So again, groups are really great for this. If you have a group assignment, then for your group assignment, instead of leaving text feedback, record a video of yourself so the students see you and they see and interact with you just by watching that video. It helps create that human connection, and human connection 100% of the time helps learning, because the more students make a human connection, the more their brain attends to it, because people pay attention to people. It's just the way the human brain works. So again, that was super quick. I want you guys to take something away from this. So now it's your turn. Here's my checklist of what I challenge you to do when you leave this session. So maybe you think that you're already doing everything that I'm saying. That's wonderful. So I'm going to say add or evaluate for all these. Either add something to your course. I gave you an idea, you haven't done it before, try adding it. Or if you think that this is something you've done, go back, look at it, and see if you can improve the interaction in something that you already have built into your course. So try to add or evaluate some media element. It could be a video, it could be something gamified. Try to add or evaluate one discussion forum. So look at your discussion forums. You probably already use them. It's one of the most popular features. But is your prompt for the discussion forum really going to promote conversation, or is it just the kind of thing where students are going to give an answer and be done with it? You want to create something where students want to go back and again and again. And last, try to add or evaluate one feedback element. So you give feedback, that's great, but look at your feedback. Is it positive? Does it look at how students can change? And the very last thing is ask your students. Always ask your students. Your students are filled with ideas. Ask your students, is this interactive? Ask students, how can we improve this interaction? Ask their opinions, and you will always be amazed at the ideas that you get from your students. So thank you so much. I know that was a whirlwind of content. I was a math teacher, as I said, so I have to always ask this. What is 11Q minus Q? I'll just give you a moment. It's thank you. Thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you guys got some ideas. And now, just with a couple minutes left, Brad, do we have any lingering questions? And if we don't get to them, I think, can we go back to the slide? I'm sorry. My email address is right there on the slide, so if we don't get to it, you can also email me afterwards. Sorry about that. Yeah, thanks, Brad.
No, not at all. I'm looking through. I don't actually think we have any open questions. It's I think you covered a lot, and it's been a very supportive community in the chat with people answering questions. There's
Awesome.
Some great recommendations for third-party tools that people can use to support what you were talking about. So I don't think there are anything open. We have a minute or two, so if somebody can sneak one in. But other than that, thank you, Julia, and thank you for everybody for joining us today. I hope it was fruitful. This will be recorded, and in addition to Julia's contact, feel free to reach out to me on the Blackboard side if you have any questions.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today, and have a great day.